In this episode, we take a practical look at what it really means to staff a Security Operations Center, SOC, so it works reliably day after day instead of just sounding impressive on paper. A lot of beginners assume an SOC is mostly about tools and dashboards, but staffing is what turns those signals into decisions and decisions into action. When staffing is vague, the same alert can be handled 5 different ways depending on who is on shift, which creates confusion, missed risks, and burnout. When staffing is clear, even a small team can respond consistently because everyone knows their responsibilities, what good work looks like, and when to involve someone else. The goal here is not to memorize job titles, because titles vary, but to understand the roles that must exist, the skills those roles need, and the escalation paths that keep work moving during uncertain moments. Once you can describe these pieces clearly, you can evaluate whether a proposed SOC design is likely to function in real life. A good way to start is to separate the concept of a role from the concept of a person, because one person can sometimes cover multiple roles, especially in smaller organizations. A role is a set of responsibilities and decision rights, not a name on an org chart. One beginner-friendly way to think about this is that an SOC must sense, interpret, decide, coordinate, and improve over time, and those verbs imply different types of work. Sensing is about collecting and watching signals. Interpretation is about figuring out whether something is meaningful. Decisions are about what to do next. Coordination is about getting the right people involved. And improvement is about learning and tuning so the same noise does not keep coming back. If those responsibilities are all mixed together without clarity, the team tends to spend most of its time reacting to the loudest alert instead of focusing on what matters. Clear roles also make training easier, because you can teach a new person what their scope is today, what skills they need next, and what growth looks like in 6 months. Even before you name roles like analyst or engineer, you should be able to explain which responsibilities must be owned every shift and which can be owned by people who are not always on shift. Most SOC designs include at least one entry-level analyst role that focuses on triage, which means sorting incoming signals into categories like benign, suspicious, or urgent. This is often described as a Tier 1 role in some organizations. But the important point is the function, not the tier label. A triage-focused analyst needs to be comfortable with uncertainty and able to follow a repeatable approach that reduces mistakes, because triage work can become rushed if the queue is busy. Key skills include reading basic event information, understanding common security concepts like authentication and network connections, and recognizing obvious false positives without dismissing everything. They must also be able to write clear notes, because their work becomes the starting point for someone else during escalation. Beginners sometimes think triage is simple, but it is actually where quality begins, because bad triage creates 2 kinds of harm. It wastes time chasing noise, and it misses real incidents by marking them as normal. When you staff this role, you should plan for training, supervision, and feedback, because a new analyst needs guidance to learn what patterns mean in your environment. The next common role is a deeper investigation analyst who takes cases that triage has identified as meaningful and works them into a confident conclusion. This role is often described as Tier 2, but again, the function matters more than the label. Investigation requires skills that go beyond spotting a strange event, because the analyst must build a story from evidence and decide what is likely happening. They need stronger knowledge of systems, such as how accounts behave, how endpoints generate events, and how network activity can look when a machine is doing something unusual. They also need strong reasoning skills, because investigation is a process of testing hypotheses rather than hunting for a single magic indicator. Communication becomes even more critical here, because the investigation analyst often has to contact system owners, ask focused questions, and explain why certain actions might be needed. If this role is understaffed or unclear, cases either pile up or get escalated too quickly to incident response without enough evidence, which creates alarm fatigue across the organization. Staffing this role well is one of the biggest drivers of confidence, because it determines whether the SOC can separate real threats from confusing but harmless activity. Many SOC teams also need an incident coordination role that focuses on managing the response process when something is serious, even if that role is not always staffed by a separate person. The key idea is that when an incident is unfolding, the organization needs someone who can keep the work organized, track decisions, and maintain a timeline, because technical investigation and coordination are different mental tasks. If the same person tries to do everything at once, important steps can be missed simply because attention is fragmented. Coordination involves making sure the right people are informed, ensuring containment actions are authorized, and confirming that evidence is preserved for later review. It also includes managing the pace of escalation so that leaders receive meaningful updates rather than constant noise. This role needs strong communication, an ability to translate technical findings into practical impact, and an understanding of who has authority to approve disruptive actions. Beginners often imagine that the most technical person should run every incident, but coordination is its own specialty, and it directly affects how well the organization performs under pressure. When staffing is clear, everyone knows who is steering the process and who is focused on technical work. Another role that becomes essential as the SOC matures is the detection engineering role, which is responsible for improving what the SOC sees and how it alerts. Even in beginner terms, this role exists because the environment changes constantly, and detections must be tuned or they either miss important activity or overwhelm analysts with false alarms. Detection engineering includes writing and refining alert logic, understanding data sources, validating that signals are accurate, and working closely with analysts to learn which patterns are helpful. The skill set is different from triage and investigation because it is more about designing reliable detection and less about responding to each case. This role also supports consistency because it turns lessons learned from incidents into improvements that prevent repeated confusion. When this role is missing, the SOC becomes stuck in a loop where analysts complain about noisy alerts, but nothing changes, so morale drops and quality suffers. Beginners should recognize that an SOC is not only a response team. It is also a continuous improvement system, and improvement requires ownership. Even if the organization is small, someone must own detection quality as part of their responsibilities. A closely related role is the security operations engineer role, which focuses on the health of the security monitoring environment itself and the reliability of the workflows around it. This includes maintaining integrations, ensuring that data is arriving as expected, and keeping the case handling system stable so analysts can work without constant friction. If data stops flowing or arrives incorrectly, the SOC can become blind without realizing it, which is one of the more dangerous failure modes. This role also tends to own automation and workflow improvements, not because automation is the goal, but because repetitive manual steps create errors and slow response. The engineer needs strong systems thinking and an ability to troubleshoot issues that span multiple components, and they also need to understand the analyst perspective so improvements actually help. Beginners sometimes assume that operations engineering is optional, but it becomes crucial as soon as the environment grows or becomes more complex. A small team can still cover this work, but it must be assigned explicitly because otherwise it will be neglected until something breaks. Clear staffing means acknowledging that reliability work is real work and needs time and accountability. Leadership and management roles are also part of staffing, even if beginners initially focus only on analysts. An SOC leader is responsible for setting expectations, defining priorities, protecting quality, and making sure the team's work aligns with organizational risk. This includes decisions about coverage schedules, training plans, and how escalations should work during off hours or emergencies. Management also owns performance feedback and coaching, which is essential in a high-pressure environment where people can develop bad habits if they never get guidance. Another critical leadership function is stakeholder management, meaning relationships with system owners, IT, and executives, because the SOC cannot succeed if it is isolated. Leaders also set the tone for what matters, such as whether the team is rewarded for learning and reducing repeat issues or simply for closing cases quickly. Beginners should see that leadership is not just administrative, because it shapes the culture of decision-making, and culture influences every alert response. Staffing is incomplete if you have analysts, but no one owns standards, growth, and accountability. Once roles are identified, the next step is to define the skills each role must have, and to do it in a way that matches the work rather than relying on vague descriptions. Skills can be grouped into technical knowledge, investigative thinking, communication, and operational discipline, and every role draws from all four categories in different proportions. Technical knowledge includes understanding how common systems behave, how authentication works, and how basic network activity can indicate different types of actions. Investigative thinking includes forming hypotheses, validating with evidence, and recognizing when you have enough information to act versus when you need to gather more. Communication includes writing case notes that another person can understand quickly and speaking clearly to non-security partners when help is needed. Operational discipline includes following procedures consistently, tracking time and decisions, and recognizing when the situation requires escalation. Beginners sometimes focus on technical skills only, but in SOC work, communication and discipline are equally important because they determine whether the organization can act on what the SOC finds. A clear skills framework helps hiring, training, and handoffs because it turns expectations into something teachable and measurable. Escalation paths are the glue that connects roles, because an SOC is built around the idea that not every issue deserves the same level of attention. Escalation is not about panic. It is about moving the work to the right level of expertise and authority at the right time. A basic escalation path often moves from triage to investigation, and then, when needed, to incident coordination and organizational decision-makers. There are also lateral escalations, such as reaching out to a system owner for context or involving an engineer when data collection is incomplete. A healthy escalation path includes explicit triggers, like certain types of indicators, certain levels of impact, or certain degrees of uncertainty, so the choice is not purely personal judgment. If escalations are too easy, the organization gets flooded with false alarms. If escalations are too hard, real incidents get delayed. Beginners should understand that escalation is a risk management tool because it controls how quickly and how broadly the organization responds. Clear escalation paths protect both security and the business by ensuring that the right people are involved before actions become disruptive. To make escalation work in real life, you need clarity about authority because some response actions can affect customers, operations, or legal obligations. An SOC can recommend actions, but in many organizations the authority to take certain actions belongs to other roles, such as system owners or senior leaders. This is why escalation paths should include who approves containment steps, who communicates outward, and who is responsible for declaring that an incident exists. Beginners can think of this like a fire drill, where it is not enough to spot smoke. You also need a plan for who pulls the alarm, who calls emergency services, and who guides people to safety. In security, the equivalent is who isolates a system, who resets credentials, and who decides whether the situation meets the definition of an incident. When these decisions are unclear, people hesitate, and hesitation increases damage. Clear authority also prevents overreaction, because it ensures that disruptive actions are taken deliberately rather than by whoever happens to be on shift. Staffing and escalation are inseparable because authority lives inside roles, not inside tools. It is also important to include training and progression as part of staffing design, because an SOC is not a static team, and beginners will eventually become intermediate analysts if the environment supports growth. A progression path helps retention and quality because people can see how to build skills over time instead of feeling stuck doing repetitive work forever. For example, a triage analyst may develop investigation skills, then begin to own certain case types, and later contribute to detection improvements. This kind of progression reduces the gap between roles because people learn how the entire system fits together, which improves handoffs and empathy. Training should not be treated as optional, because without it the team will either stagnate or develop inconsistent habits based on guesswork. Beginners should understand that a high-functioning SOC behaves like a learning organization, where each incident and false alarm is an opportunity to refine judgment and improve signals. Staffing decisions that ignore training are like building a team that never practices, and practice is what turns basic knowledge into dependable performance under pressure. Clear roles make training possible because you can target skill development to the responsibilities that matter most. One more piece that new learners often miss is the importance of documenting responsibilities in a way that survives turnover and shift changes. If a role exists only in someone's head, the role disappears when that person is sick, resigns, or switches tasks during a busy week. Clear roles should include what is expected each shift, how to record decisions, how to escalate, and what counts as complete. This is not about bureaucracy for its own sake, because in security operations, memory is unreliable and stress is high, so written standards reduce mistakes. Documentation also supports fairness, because it provides consistent expectations and reduces the chance that one analyst is blamed for doing what others do regularly. For follow the sun or any multi-shift operation, documentation is the difference between continuity and chaos, because the next shift must be able to pick up a case quickly without redoing everything. Beginners can think of this as passing a baton in a relay race. The handoff must be smooth and deliberate or the race is lost. Staffing includes the systems that make people effective, and those systems rely on clear shared standards. When you step back, staffing in SOC is really about designing a small ecosystem where responsibilities are owned, skills are built, and work moves smoothly from one person to the next when the situation demands it. Roles like triage analysis, investigation, incident coordination, detection engineering, operations engineering, and leadership represent different types of work that must be done for the SOC to be reliable. Skills must be defined in a way that includes reasoning, communication, and discipline, not just technical familiarity, because these are the qualities that prevent mistakes and drive consistent outcomes. Escalation paths must be explicit, with triggers and authority boundaries, so that the organization responds quickly without overreacting and without depending on individual personality. Training and progression must be part of the staffing plan, because a team that cannot grow will eventually break under the weight of changing systems and threats. Finally, the most important idea for a beginner is that staffing is not the act of filling seats. It is the act of defining responsibility and building a decision-making engine that works even on the hardest day. When roles, skills, and escalation paths are clear, the SOC becomes a dependable capability instead of a stressful guessing game. 123,456.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.